Hello everybody and welcome to our next episode of Safeguarding News. I'm Vikkey Chaffe. I'm Head of Community and Partnership Relations at the Safeguarding Company and I'm joined by Luke.
Hello, I'm Luke Ramsden. I'm Deputy Head at St Benedict's School and Chair of the Safeguarding Panel for the Safeguarding Company.
Wonderful. And today's highlights are we're going to be discussing Dove's new campaign about kids' online safety and their Beauty Be Real. And we're also going to be talking about the DFE's research paper around working lives of teachers and leaders. So I'm going to kick off today, and it just so happens that I was perusing my LinkedIn and one of my contacts had posted this video, and it was an incredibly powerful video, and it showed the life of a child as she grew up, and then she was a very happy child. Then she got her phone and was then released into the world of social media, and it showed her mental health deteriorating, but it's real life clips as well, and it showed that she started to have a real battle with eating disorders, and she had a real body dysmorphia issue as well, and it all stemmed from the glorification of beauty that is shown online and what is expected to be beauty. Now you can very much stretch this into everything else. In fact, my daughter, it was her birthday recently, and she got one of these rainbow high dolls, very beautiful, lovely, colourful hair. But I said to my eldest daughter, this is what is now being portrayed as beautiful, and it was a very small waist, and it was very small legs, and perfectly symmetrical faces, and it's just not real, and it's not reality. So Dove have created this campaign, and they've actually created a petition as well to make more accountability for the social media sites. So they've said that 8 in 10 youth mental health specialists say that social media is fueling a mental health crisis. They've asked for you to join in their mission to make social media a more positive place by taking a stand against its harmful design so that platforms can be safer for children. So there's the video then, which is called Cost of Beauty, and then underneath there is a petition that they're asking people to sign, and it's called the Dove Self-Esteem Project, and it's partnering with Common Sense Media and Parents Together Action to advance the Kids Online Safety Act, supporting designing standards and safeguarding to protect children online. So they've asked everybody to sign that petition, and it's got a few 100,000 signatures already. But I just thought it was a really powerful video, and one that will really resonate with parents, with the children, with other members of staff, and it's got some really valuable resources on there. So I've linked everything in the show notes. I've linked the video separately as well if you want to go and have a look at it. But it's a really, really good resource page as well. So Luke, you wanted to talk about the working lives of teachers and leaders.
Yeah, and very much dovetails with what you were talking about, with the rise in mental health issues, the rise in all sorts of pastoral issues. And it's very interesting that this report was pushed out in the middle of the school holidays with absolutely no fanfare by the government. And this is a report that's been done, a survey of over 11,000 teachers and leaders across England. And it's a lot of it wouldn't be that surprising. You know, we're in the middle of teachers going on strike and worries about pay and conditions. And so a lot of those things, it gives really, really helpful details about what's going wrong. The thing that struck me was what an interesting and worrying light it sheds on our ability to be good at safeguarding in schools and to be excellent at pastoral care, because of this real sort of dilemma of increasing squeezes on teachers' time, on resources, but a growing job that we have to do. So I'll just go through a few key points. It's about 150 pages, so I thought it'd be useful for me to just draw out some of the key findings. But if you want to have a look, I've put the link to the document in the notes to this podcast, but do have a look yourself. And there's quite a useful sort of executive summary at the beginning, which tells you some key points. But the first thing, not surprising at all, but it said that life satisfaction for teachers, given the current strikes, life satisfaction for teachers it found was 6.1 out of 10, which they said was lower than any equivalent group of adults sort of in different jobs in the country. So it said lower than other equivalents. And it struck me that if teachers aren't feeling very good in their well-being, then supporting the well-being of students is going to be pretty tricky. So that from the outset was for me a big concern, and something that clearly when people are asking, what is, what are the challenges facing schools and teachers, that has to be a big one. And then directly linking with that is their second finding about workload. And again, lots of teachers will nod their heads a lot at this. They said 56% of teachers and leaders in schools thought their workload was unacceptable, so over half. And then of that, 75% thought that just general admin was taking up too much of their time. And so it's very interesting to see, again, what a lot of teachers will think, that paperwork, just sorting things out, that's doing administration rather than focusing on the well-being of students, was taking on too much of their time. So two headline bits of news that, again, won't be that surprising, but I think if you're a school leader, or indeed a DSL or a teacher, seeing that real objective fact, this is a Department for Education bit of research. So it potentially sort of surprising that they're finding this thing that demonstrates why people are going on strike. A third important thing was, and this is something where perhaps school leaders could start to do something about this, so 50% of teachers said they spent too much time on following up behaviour issues. And that struck me as an interesting point. And in particular, the last podcast we did talked about mandatory reporting, something I strongly feel is a really good idea and should be put in place. But it also struck me that if currently teachers are saying too much time is spent on behaviour and pastoral issues, if that one study in Australia said there'll be a 6-fold increase in pastoral concerns and reporting, if we're already struggling, if you increase that by 6, I guess, how does that really work? So there's a big problem there of potentially saying we're going to increase the workload for schools. I think it's a sensible thing to want to address all these pastoral issues and deal with them in the proper way. But how we're going to do that is something surely the government has to address properly. Number 4 was looking at CPD, the professional development of teachers. Now, interestingly, the bit of training that most teachers felt they'd done was safeguarding. So that was a real positive. That was a good thing. But it did strike me that 80% of teachers said they'd done formal CPD this year about safeguarding. So one thing that did strike me was 20% haven't. So which is probably 20% more than you want. So that in itself was a high number, but did raise its own questions. And then particularly, again, another thing where the government are rightly saying we want to have a greater focus on PSHE, in particular RSE, sex education, relationships education is very important. But we know, don't we, across schools, there are very few specialists, very few people are, trained in just being a PSHE or RSE teacher. So it was striking that 48% of teachers who teach PSHE as a second subject, which is most teachers, most people do it as an extra thing, did not feel confident in their subject knowledge on PSHE. So at least about around half of teachers teaching PSHE aren't confident in their subject knowledge. So again, that might not surprise a lot of people. A lot of school leaders will be saying, yes, no, this is a big challenge. We've got to train up a lot of teachers to be really effective at teaching PSHE. But it was very striking that a national survey across England really, gave the numbers to back that up. And,
it's interesting that you should say that. Sorry to interject, but it just really highlighted something for me, is that I've just done a podcast with Dr. Emily Setti, who did the consent paper around boys and their perceptions of consent. And we spent an awful lot of time talking about how teachers just aren't trained or equipped to be able to have these conversations, to to be informed well enough to
Yeah.
be able to take these conversations where they need to go. And then it turns into a really dangerous area
Yes.
at that point. And then you've got all the time constraints as well, that goes on within school as well, where actually there's something where you can say we're doing more harm than good in some respects there.
Well, ill-informed relationships and sex education is self-evidently pretty disastrous. So absolutely, I
Absolutely.
think there are a huge amount on training, huge amount on, there are lots of good external companies, but then again, one of the points that I thought was reasonable from the government was to say there are quite a few companies that perhaps aren't so well regulated and aren't so good on relations to sex education. So that is a whole area that needs to be looked at really carefully. Um, Interestingly, again, very closely linked with safeguarding pastoral care, is that one of the other key areas where teachers said they lacked confidence was in, quote, adapting teaching to the needs of all pupils. So largely to do with students who have special educational needs or disabilities. Only 72% said they were confident in that. So that strikes that there's lots of there were over a quarter of teachers saying they're really not confident of that. And in particular, there was a group of early career teachers who were asked about this, and they said that 3/4 of them said that they haven't been well prepared for SEND support in lessons. So that's another area where clearly they are the areas where students can feel marginalised, feel less well included. They need to have their needs met. And that's where, again, teachers are perhaps not feeling they're being well supported. One bright note, always good to finish on a bright note, is that 2/3 of teachers did say that pupil behaviour was good, and only 16% said behaviour was poor or very poor. One thing I did notice that was very interesting was that school leaders were much, much more positive. So those people who aren't actually in the classroom, 42% of school leaders said pupil behaviour was very good. 17% of people actually in the classroom. So just struck me there is that contrast between the people who are leading schools perhaps not having quite as the same view as the people who are actually in the trenches. Just one other document very quickly to note is that TES also did a school wellbeing report of another 6,000 or so teachers. And it's not surprising to say it actually found very, very similar things about workload, about the concerns that teachers have. And just something I'm going to quote, because I think they put it really well in the conclusion to their report. They talk about a tug of war of the teaching profession, while systemic issues such as funding and workload are continuing to push staff to their limit. Strong relationships with students remain front and centre, but it's clear that teachers need more support in that, it goes on to say. So I think those two documents, and I would highly recommend them to any teacher or school leader, this Department for Education report and this TES report, to look at them. But those key headlines they're not that surprising, I think, but they do provide a really useful, quantifiable view of what's going on around the country, around England, and also putting it in that framework of safeguarding and pastoral care. It strikes me that if there are all these problems being within our teaching group, then it's going to be a real struggle to be as excellent as we want to be in safeguarding and pastoral care, and that's clearly the challenge that lies ahead.
And it's conversation that we've had many times where when you're on an aeroplane, the first thing that they tell you to do if you're in an emergency is to put your own life mask on before you support others. And this is no different, is it? And we need to sort out our teachers' mental health and before we can even tackle what's going on with our children, because you just aren't in the best frame of mind to support, and it can be quite triggering as well for some of our members of staff.
Absolutely, and to go to a point you mentioned just before the podcast, so it's somewhat similar to the idea about maths teachers. It is a really nice idea to say we're going to teach students to maths up to 18, but then you turn around and ask the very basic question of, do we have enough teachers? In the same way, it's brilliant to think we're going to teach RSE fantastically to all our students, but where's the support? Where are the teachers? It's brilliant to think we're going to have mandatory reporting and we're going to have fantastic safeguarding care, but where's the support? Where's the workload provision? All of these things have to be answered if we're actually practically going to be able to make these changes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for listening to our latest episode of Safeguarding News. As ever, please join in the conversation in the safeguarding community. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are on what we've been talking about today. And until next time, I'm Vikkey Chaffe.
I'm Luke Ramsden.
Fabulous. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.